Hi, Lieke. Could you start by introducing yourself, your name, and what you do?
Hi, I'm Lieke Wouters. I am from the Netherlands and I am a freelance illustrator and animator. Currently working on a film for Marlin Spy called Trouble in Mind. We're using Toon to make that, and it's really cool.
Awesome. I look forward to seeing it. So in 10 seconds, your scene tells an entire story of multiple generations of family that are sitting down to a shared meal. What inspired this idea for a scene?
It's actually my childhood that inspired this scene. My grandparents, my grandmother was from Indonesia, and we used to go to their place and have these big family meals. Granddad had pigeons in the garden, so we used to feed them, and then so that's kind of what inspired it. Like we feeding the pigeons, and then we get called inside to have this big family dinner with all of us, and
Oh, that's so nice. You titled the scene, I'm gonna butcher saying this in Dutch, but Ristafel. What does this mean in English? And if you could actually explain what the term means.
Right, so it's pronounced rijsttafel. It's literal translation is rice table, and it's literally the meal that I drew in the last shot. It's the meal that we're eating. So the rijsttafel is a big meal with lots of different Indonesian dishes that my grandmother she brought to us from Indonesia to the Netherlands, and it's a family, or it's a bundle of family recipes that get passed on from generation to generation. When I was 18, I got this little booklet, which I filled up with all kinds of different recipes. But in the bag are my aunt gave it to me. It's all these old recipes that she typed out. So it's that's the title. It's the meal as the title.
You animated this scene using Harmony. Which Harmony features did you most rely on to create this animation? And were there any features that stood out to you in particular?
I heavily rely on the node view. I do almost everything within the node view. I love how intuitive it is. I love how it works, the nodes and how you connect them. And I like to keep it neat and organized as much as possible. To create subtle lighting and textures, I use the function of the different art layers within our drawing node. I drew all the main elements on the first 3 art layers, and then I used the underlay art layer to draw on textures. And then I used the main element as a mask for these textures, as you can see right here. The textures are drawn in 2 different colors, a shadow color and a light color. They go through this composite, and each color gets selected. The lighter color then goes through a blending mode of a soft light blending mode, and the darker color goes through a overlay blending mode. There we go. And this way the texture are actually connected to the animated parts already, so I don't have to draw everything frame by frame again. I just have to add them to my already existing drawings. And I will show you what it looks like when it is rendered. As you can see, it's very subtle. I love this little technique. I love this little system because you can adjust it very easily using also, for example, I've used blending nodes here, but you could
definitely use the color override node to create create shadow with very specific palettes. But yeah, you can turn it off. You'll see like this. There's no texture, no lighting whatsoever. Ingrid that, and then like this is what it looks like when it's turned on. So yeah.
And the scene opens with a swooping camera motion that follows several cutout pigeons that you mentioned as they fly down into the yard. How did you approach using pegs to animate these flying pigeons?
So I separated the motion between like the how do you say it, the trend, like it moves from up down and then it rotates as well. So
yeah, I don't know how. I think you said it the right way.
Yeah. The pigeons, they move from up to down, and that motion is a separate peg, and then I also have a separate peg for the rotation of the pigeon, so I can adjust these separately and have the most control over the movement.
And what was your process for rigging the cutout animation characters in this scene?
So first I made a sketch, of course, of the characters, and then I just made little drawing notes for every single element that I wanted to have separate, drew them out, connected them all with pegs, and made the hierarchy. It's a very basic cutout rig, but it does the job.
Yeah. And the characters in the scene, they have such subtle lighting and textures. What tools did you use to achieve this look, and how did you go about using them?
So what I wanted to do is create the textures and like little lighting things after the animation. So the rig is but I did want to connect the textures to the elements of the rig. So I didn't want to like have to paint every single frame separately. So what I did was actually create make a mask of the separate elements, like the arm, the hand, the face, and then with a lot of little tricks made the texture made it so that it follows the this is really hard to describe because I know what I did, but how to put it in words? Jeez.
So what was your technique for making layered backgrounds and then creating the motion transitions between them?
So I made a Storyboard Pro file. I made a little storyboard for the scene, and then with the export layout function of Storyboard Pro, I was able to get the exact layout, the exact sizing of the backgrounds that I wanted, and then I just make the background. How you make the backgrounds from front layer, back layer, how do you say foreground, background? That's the word. Those are the words. And the motion transition between the second and third shot was actually something I decided on quite last minute. So I first made the second shot and then the third shot, and then I merged them, and then I made an extra background with like motion blur, which I hand painted and then put it in there to bridge that gap between the two. And then I added some extra effects over it with the Toon Boom Harmony nodes, motion blur thingies, just to make it more like to blend it together. So that's how.
It turned out perfectly.
Yeah, it turned out pretty.
How did you use inverse kinematics to your advantage in animating this scene?
I love inverse kinematics because they're already building in the rig basically, so it's just turning some things off and some things on, and then I use it in this case. I think mostly with Grandpa in the first shot, just to make him sway a little bit with his hips, just go from left to right, or from right to left. Those little tiny little animations where the feet just have to be grounded. I love using that feature for those kind of things.
What did you use curve deformers and freeform deformers for in animating this scene?
I used the freeform deformers for the faces, mostly just to get little subtle turns in the heads, without having to draw a ton of tiny little different eye shapes or whatever. I think for a simple scene as this, I really use those freeform deformers just to get little tweaks. And the curve deformers, I just use them in places where I feel like it's easier or better to just pull at something than draw everything. It's more intuitive than having to draw everything over and over and over again. So I tend to use those things to make life easier for myself, basically.
And then what feature of Harmony was your favorite to use in animating this particular scene?
Well, I loved working with the blending nodes. It's just, it works a little bit like, I don't really want to say Photoshop, but because there are a lot of programs that use blending nodes, of course. But the favorite feature I think is the blending nodes, because you can do such cool things with the little, like an overlay layer, and just give it a little bit more depth. I love having the opportunity to use those things to just make it a little bit more extra.
Amazing. Welcome everyone, and hello Greg. Thank you for joining us from LA, is it?
Temecula, California, about an hour away from LA.
Lovely California. Lucky you.
Yep, the hub of animation, even though everyone's doing it from home anyway these days.
Yes, quite. And thank you for making time and speaking with us. It's good to have you.
Yeah, good to be here.
Great. And so thank you for your wonderful pasta recipe, the animated recipe. It's a real dynamic sort of visual feast.
Oh yeah, thanks so much. I had a lot of fun thinking up that one, and whipping up something of the odd variety.
It certainly was eye-catching. What's the inspiration behind the dish? Is it dear to you?
Yeah, that's just my mom's classic tomato sauce for spaghetti. Nothing too eccentric or anything. Just a very, very solid, very good Italian spices, and just the kind that makes me not want to ever order tomato sauce or spaghetti from a restaurant. Just nice. It's just our staple family meal.
Lovely. And what without giving away too many secrets, what goes into the perfect tomato sauce?
Yeah, so I got the recipe here. So yeah, I would imagine, not that I have too many to compare it to, but I imagine it's not too different from like a typical, just like good Italian tomato sauce. You have to use hot Italian sausage is a big thing. So it's got a little bit of spice to it. Then you got just crushed tomatoes, or just some water, garlic, oregano, basil or however you say that, parsley, some sugar, baking soda, Romano cheese, and then you make some, then Italian meatballs, which you have to, once you put the meatballs in the sauce, you want to make sure the sauce cooks for like 3 hours, and then you don't want to let it boil. You want to stir it pretty consistently, at least every now and then. You want to check in, make sure it doesn't boil, because that'll make the meatballs fall apart. So as long as you keep an eye on it and cook it right, that'll keep them nice and firm.
Amazing. Thank you for the pointers. That sounds delicious.
Yeah, I love it. I'm not much of a cook myself, but I'm always happy to eat it.
Very good. So I've always thought that cooking is a little bit like chemistry, in that you get sort of, when you add elements, you get sort of different reactions and interactions between elements. I feel like your scene reflects this really well. Things feel like they have a kind of chemistry to them. How do you even begin to sort of
so I guess the way I would see it is that, like, it's sort of like when you have a bunch of ingredients together or on their own. I mean, they don't really mean anything until you bring them together. And so like it's kind of just chemistry in the sense that once you put all these disparate elements together, then it somehow magically becomes something awesome that you can eat. And animation's kind of similar, because, or animation and art in general, is just like, a lot of times it doesn't really make sense or look like acceptable at all until it's finished. But once it's finished, then you have something there. So in a sense, it's just like the process is kind of similar to cooking.
Yeah, I agree. I think so. And often the sort of the person they've just consumed is very pleasing, but they might not necessarily know the secrets that go into the process,
Right. Yeah, and to an onlooker, they might see one ingredient and they won't think that it's important at all. But
yeah, exactly. Some things make all the difference. So with the spaghetti, focusing in on the sort of components of your recipe, the spaghetti is a very sort of unruly and sort of random sort of creature in your film. How did you achieve the sort of texture that we can see there?
Yeah, so that took a lot of really just kind of playing around in the rough animation stage, because I felt like was one way to make it a little more manageable was to treat it more like a surreal like vision of an ocean, which I could make into like just chunks and waves, because it starts out where you have one noodle, then it comes into like a few stray noodles kind of wiggling around, and like if the whole animation was like that, that would have taken forever, because like individual noodles being animated like that took a very long time. There's like a few frames in there where you see the splash where there's a lot of individual noodles, and that's definitely, I wanted to keep that at the beginning so that you kind of see that it is spaghetti, but then once they kind of conglomerate into a whole, then it becomes more of an ocean wave looking thing, and that way I could just draw some big like curvy shapes and then add lines later to make it look more like noodles. And then so yeah, once I kind of had the beginning set up as some stray noodles, then I think it reads okay as spaghetti for the whole thing then.
I see. So you kind of you sort of establish the sort of visual, and then that allows you to then sort of be a little bit more broad and a bit more abstract with how it moves.
Yeah, I think that's at least what I was hoping to achieve for sure. Like if I could establish that the spaghetti is kind of coming in, and then and it looks like spaghetti, then the audience can hopefully accept it once it becomes an ocean of spaghetti, which, as far as I know, doesn't exist in real life.
If only it did.
Yeah, I'll find it if it's out there.
Oh, that's brilliant. Well, I think it as a technique, it works really well. It's quite sort of it's very very recognizably spaghetti, and then it kind of moves into this sort of immersive kind of sort of larger sort of entity, which really is interesting. And speaking of that, the sort of anthropomorphism when the spaghetti kind of changes into this bird, that was quite mind-blowing. what was the sort of what was the idea, and how did you come up with the idea to turn sort of, it's almost like a kind of comet comes down with the tomato, and then from the explosion this bird comes out like a phoenix, and it's really quite beautiful, and just interested how you sort of came up with that.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm glad you liked it. It's basically as soon as we got like the prompt for it for like the food related theme, I basically asked right away. So can we take it in like a surreal direction? Because like I can do pretty much any kind of animation and try and find some way to work some kind of creature into it because I like animals, I like monsters. Monsters are like my favorite thing. And so
Yep.
if I can find an excuse to put some kind of living creature into a theme, no matter what it is, I'll do it. And but yeah, and then it's like I kind of experimented in my mind of just like, what if there was like fish swimming around, what if there was like a whale bursting out of it, which would fit the kind of water theme. But then I sort of just got the image of if I had a bird bursting out of the waves, that could make it like soar into the sky and then dive back in, which would be a little bit more dynamic and maybe be able to make a cool like swooping motion and then make a big splash. And the splash is a lot of fun to animate just with because it's a little bit different than water when you have the tomato sauce looking a little thicker. So I thought just having a bird kind of with like the sharp beak shape kind of swirl and like dive into the noodles and the bowl, I thought that would make for a good, really sharp motion that adds some good dynamicism. Which yeah, that was a lot of fun.
It's really really cool, and it's a really nice way to sort of show off the kind of physics that are going on with the sort of different sort of the sort of solids and liquids that make up the dish. It reminded me almost of kind of sort of medieval banquets where they would have sort of a pie burst open and 12 partridges fly out,
Oh, yeah.
kind of medieval sort of dish, Right. It gave me that kind of energy.
Yeah. Maybe that was subconsciously in there somewhere because I watched Game of Thrones so many years ago. So, but yeah, I like medieval stuff very much. So yeah, maybe that was subconscious in there.
Perhaps, definitely. So what I must ask, what kind of techniques in terms of the software went into bringing that bird and that surrealism to life?
Right. So for the most part, a lot of it was just getting it right in the rough animation stage. And for rough animation, it varies from project to project, but I really like using Toon Boom's bitmap brushes for roughing things out because I love the sketchy feel of it. And that's one thing I love about Toon Boom compared to a lot of other software. Alrighty. So yeah, so let me do some digging in here, and you can see my absolutely horribly unorganized document. I've tried to like conglomerate everything into some groups as much as I can. But all right, so we got shot 1 here, and then if we dig far enough, we should be able to find some rough stuff. So let's yeah, so here's what I kind of started with was yeah, so you can see very, very scribbly. I work very, very rough with my roughs, and that's mainly for if I'm working with like another client who has to clean up my work, then I'll try and make my roughs cleaner. But if it's just for me, I will make them very messy, and I want the world to know that's okay. So yeah, I did that, and then later on, once I cleaned it up, you can see the purple is where I added the nodes to control the shading and stuff. So that's like I think I have just like yeah, here I have the shade color, which I just used that to block in the shading, and then used some cutters and some shadow nodes to get the colors looking right.
Fantastic. Really.
So yeah, you can see how I use some of the more kind of rough, sketchy lines for blocking things in.
Yeah. And you mentioned that that tool was customizable. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. So let me find a bitmap layer, or yeah, actually for efficiency's sake, let's just make a new one. So I got So some of these are like all the defaults are up here, and then down here I have the glorious Greg line of pencils that I've customized for my own use, which are yeah. So some of these are just a lot of these I just took some textures over that I've had for other brushes and other software that I've just kind of imported here or tried to replicate. But yeah, so you can in one of the previous Harmony editions, I know they added the dual tip, which just experimenting with the dual tip alone can make a pencil feel a lot more natural, just because you get a little bit more texture to it.
I see. Yeah.
And so yeah, I've made a few pencils. Some are more solid, some are a little bit more fluffy and sketchy, which I try and use for when I don't want to be too precise yet. Then I got some more vector looking ones, and then this one I didn't experiment with too much, but a long time ago I used this just to see if I can make something like painterly in Toon Boom, which turns out even that can be done pretty well.
Yeah, I was gonna say it definitely seems to have the sort of tactile feel of a sort of larger paintbrush.
Yeah. So I just love that
stuff.
Toon Boom has that versatility to make those kinds of brushes.
Fantastic. And you mentioned the nodes with the shading process. What other nodes can we sort of see going on here?
Alrighty, so let me get this node view a little bit more visible here. So so this is my node view after I've condensed it down very, very much. So this is the clean version. And so let me find. So yeah, actually, the shading was done pretty late into it. So I actually have the roughs and like the animation and elements themselves in very big groups here. So here's like the first shot here's more like what the shot looks like.
Right.
And I go into it with and yeah, there's still a lot of layers that are turned off because they're just the roughs. But so once we get into shading, I would color it with the purple like blocking brush, and then I would have the cutter node to make sure the shadows stay inside just all the elements of the first shot, so it doesn't just go into the background. It's only on the noodles and everything. And then I would I would have like the entire most elements of shot one are just on their own entire cutter so that the shading can stay inside of. And then I would use a shadow node to let me pull that over here. Is it showing the shadow node? It's on its own window.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So actually the color in the color palette doesn't actually matter because I just used the shadow node window itself to pick a color. And then I didn't use any blurring for that one. And then once I did that, then where'd I put so actually I experimented. I was going to use just a regular node and then put a blending node into it to try like multiply or add or stuff like that for the different effects, but I thought the shadow node worked pretty much okay.
Yeah.
And so yeah, once I did that, then I also had a similar process for the glowy parts, so like the highlights, except for those I did have some blurring on, which is one of the only real differences.
Right.
So yeah, that's basically the end of the shading process. Just doing that. So yeah, I have hard shadows and then softer highlights, which no real like logical reason for, or I was experimenting with a bunch of different settings and I thought that ended up looking the best.
Yeah. I mean, it lends it just sort of, a real sort of realism and aids the movement between elements, massively. There's I want to speak about the sort of there's a really interesting effect going on between the kind of the foreground and the background. I think you could call it like a parallax effect.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. How do you go about sort of achieving that in Toon Boom?
Right. So that was not too complicated. That was like I thought at the very end I could add something that just makes the background pop a little bit more, give it some more depth. Really, so like the cloves of garlic and the little parsley flakes there, and stuff like that. That's mainly just you draw them on their own layers, and you can really just a lot of it is just letting the camera do the work because.
Right.
So I have the camera set up. Camera with lots of different peg layers going on here, and each one of these you can actually use the apply peg transformation node to just like clone a lot of these. But for this one, I just most of these I drew by hand and then copy pasted them by hand. But so each each garlic clove has its own layer, and then there's like sections of the flakes that have their own layers. And so I would use the maintain size tool on their pegs, and just that way I could push them back. So here, if you look at my top view, all these little like trinkets here and there, these are all the garlic and the spice that are just floating around.
Right. Wow.
So yeah, so that way, so they're all tweened a little bit to like move to the left and rotate just a little bit, but for the most part, it's just the camera movement just makes it so they look farther away than the foreground elements, and that's very convenient. And I love doing that in Toon Boom, just pushing things back and just adding a little bit of depth to any scene.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of achieving that other dimension. Through essentially through creating that depth, which is really nice. And then kind of climaxing with that sort of tomato hitting,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I thought having the background elements made the kind of quick camera movement read a little bit better. Like once it zooms across here, it's pretty fast. So I thought having the tweened elements in the background a little bit slower than the foreground helped. Or at least since it's on ones, you can kind of see exactly, all right, it's moving this far and then it stops.
Oh, yeah, I see.
Yeah, that part actually was one of the hardest parts, was just getting this to not look like complete nonsense.
Right, I see. So that all had to kind of be relative to one another on the sort of, you had to, I guess, offset the time difference a little bit by slowing the other elements down.
Yeah. Because like you got the camera moving to the right pretty fast, and then like the waves are also moving to the left, which was pretty. So they're kind of two opposing forces that I had to make sure didn't just look like just flashing nonsense.
Yeah, I see.
But yeah, I think it ended up just okay enough.
Yeah, definitely. And the background kind of almost sort of anchors it all kind of together, because it sort of looks like one consistent sort of flow rather than a lot of sort of things competing with one another.
Yeah, exactly. I think having something that stays a little bit more still than the rest of it at least makes it seem like you're still looking at the same scene, even if the foreground elements are moving very fast.
Yeah, I see. Very cool. So thank you very much for the demo. I think that's, you've gone under the hood quite nicely there.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask some sort of I guess some questions on like the role that like animation or more to the point, the relationship between animation and food, because I'm often seeing in anime and animated productions, the focus on the food is really interesting. It kind of adds a lot of richness, I think, and a lot of depth to a narrative. And you mentioned Game of Thrones earlier, but we see in any kind of imagined world, having its own food is kind of one of those sorts of spectrums of the imagination. So I just wanted to ask you, what do you think the role of food is in animated storytelling?
Yeah, so I think there's definitely a lot of truth to that they do. There is like some kind of weird pull to it whenever you see like really good looking food in an animated medium. It's I I think part of it is just because we're all different on this earth, but that there's one thing that most of us can agree on is that we like food. And so I think if we can portray our favorite foods and share them in animated formats, that's certainly a beautiful thing. And anyone who's watched like a Ghibli movie or played Monster Hunter, I think they can attest to that. There's like something just really comforting about watching this food be prepared and eaten, and just because when you're in an animated medium, you can take these real life foods or imaginary foods and just make them look like the most delicious thing possible. And yeah, anyone who's watched anime will know how shiny they like to make everything look, and how just just this glistening roasted chicken. I just always picture the opening of Spirited Away when they're just gorging themselves on all the all the delicious food that they've set up suspiciously, and just like it's yeah, or Monster Hunter when they go to such lengths to show the chefs preparing the food for the player character, where it's just like they don't need to do that. That's totally unnecessary for the game. It's just, but everyone loves it, and it's a beautiful thing to see, because people like food and people can all relate to it, and I think it's just there's something instinctively comforting about seeing it portrayed that way.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a really good answer.
Mhm.
A really good answer, and definitely kind of what I definitely feel when I see nice food in an animated narrative. And then my last question, we sort of you kind of already raised the point before that, but just to like kind of stick on this, do you think that sort of through animation, food can be shared, and knowledge on food can be shared? I mean, I think that both food and animation, they're like a non-verbal form of communication in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that both mediums can kind of work together to like share experiences with everybody. Because yeah, one really awesome thing about seeing food in animation is that a lot of times you get to see dishes that you've never heard of, that's from a different city or a different country or continent. Yeah. And so that's like, even if it's not real, you can at least see it and think, oh, I'd like to try that or go there, or I'd like to make something similar. And that I think is just really cool, that you get to kind of experience how other cultures see food. And
yeah,
absolutely, it's really cool.
Absolutely. And they say you eat with your eyes before your mouth, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm doing a lot of eating with my eyes lately because I'm on a diet, as the timing would work out. but yeah, it's yeah, when you look at food, even it just brings some kind of happiness when you see some really nice looking food.
Yeah. Absolutely. So what about your story yourself, Greg? How did you what was your sort of inspirations for becoming an animator?
So I just really liked cartoons a lot as a kid, and it was around like 10 years old when I decided to really get into it. But it was really just watching Disney movies and some anime and some Nickelodeon cartoons. But the main clincher for it, I think, was there was an episode of an anime about Kirby, the video game character, where they had an episode where for some reason they just decided to have all the characters literally make a cartoon and show all the steps of how you make a cartoon. And it was like, I don't know why they decided to do that, but it was really fun, and I I loved seeing it, and I think that just kind of put the bug in me that maybe wanted to start kind of getting that. So then I eventually just kind of started fiddling around with some simpler animation software and just copying things I saw on the internet without posting anything and never finishing anything. But yeah, eventually that led to me just doing like animations of Let's Players and silly stuff like that, which is always a good way to get your foot in the door. And then eventually that kind of just spiraled out of control, and now I'm doing this as a job.
Amazing. So animations of players of what? Sorry.
Let's Players, like video game players, like
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, just like guys making jokes while they play video games, and then that sort of became a thing with the channel Game Grumps. It just sort of made that into a thing of people doing a lot of just random animations of random voice clips of Let's Players or podcasters or really anything.
Right. I see. Like a kind of so you almost do like an animated highlight reel of like streamers and comedians and stuff, and you were doing that
Yeah,
sort of thing. I
yeah, and
see. I see.
yeah, I think that's a good way for people to start out because they don't have to really worry about thinking of a story or getting the source material on their own. They can just sort of like, here's an audio clip. What can I do to make it like fun or make it my own? And I think that's kind of a fun, unique challenge.
Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting, and definitely I think a good way to sort of use the landscape of the internet and the landscape of the kind of I guess the kind of YouTube economy and the sort of streaming economy to your advantage. Which
Hmm.
I feel like some people kind of struggle with when they're learning learning animation or learning sort of any kind of creative craft,
Hmm.
and how to sort of navigate through your industry and learning how to kind of get noticed by people without having to sort of ask for favors and stuff. And it sounds like you came up with an inventive way to do it.
Hmm. Yeah, and I sort of jumped in on that trend at like sort of when it was a little bit smaller and sort of rising. Now, getting noticed doing that kind of stuff is a bit harder because it's a lot more common now. But
Right.
it's I still would recommend people try it just if they're starting out because it's a lot of fun and you can just kind of you can you can get yourself noticed if you do something creative or funny, and regardless of getting noticed, it just is a fun little challenge just to take an audio clip that you uh, found somewhere else and figure if you because there's people who take those clips and they do crazy stuff with them, like totally change the context of what was being said and turn it into like they'll take two guys playing video games and turn it into them like going into a dungeon and fighting a dragon or something and just like stuff like that. Just it's a fun
It's a
way to
kind of like,
explore.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that it's almost like a kind of sort of like sampling remix kind of approach to sort of online humor and online culture. I think it's kind of where we're sort of at in a way, isn't it?
Hmm.
Uh, with things like sort of TikTok and as you said, things getting taken wildly out of context,
Yeah.
and like news being made out of it.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. I think that's one fun thing about the internet is just seeing how people can iterate on each other's ideas and just take them into really odd and fun places.
Definitely, absolutely. That's fascinating. I mean, I was going to sort of ask if you had any sort of advice for people entering the industry, but I think that forms pretty solid advice and just,
Mhm.
yeah, like just kind of be creative and work with what you see and work with what you like and don't be afraid to engage with other people who are bigger than you.
Yeah, yeah, I'd say yeah, that's a good way to put it. Just kind of like be a part of the community, like engage with people, do fan art. That's I think that's a good thing that should be encouraged. Is that because it's very hard if you're just starting out doing your own original project. That's great, but it is going to be hard to get noticed that way if you're a newcomer to the scene. And if you do fan art, then people will be looking for that kind of stuff. Like they might search this particular character, and then if you have that in your repertoire, they might stumble across your thing a little bit more likely. And so that's a good way to get like some
Yeah,
just eyes on you, get your foot in the door, and then yeah, it gets the ball rolling because yeah, that's what I did. That's what a lot of people I know did. Just did fan art and fan animations of internet personalities or other like pieces of media, stuff like that.
Hi, Aria. Could you start by introducing yourself?
Hello, I'm Aria Dines. I'm a 2D rigging artist and commercial illustrator. I'm a recent graduate and I'm on my way to get my master's. So
That's awesome. Congratulations. Where are you going to be doing your
thank you.
master's?
At Cal Arts, the California Institute of the Arts. So I can't wait. I'm so excited.
Awesome. Are you starting in the fall?
Yeah, it's all I'm in Zoom. I mean,
Yeah,
it's going by so fast.
it sure is. So could you start by describing the story that your scene tells?
So I really wanted to describe like the fabulous creation of Chicago deep dish pizza. I wanted to show how it's made since the process I think is pretty unique when compared to other traditionally made pizza. It being made like upside down and in a pan, like a pie. So I thought it'd be really cool to show the recipe process while also, giving it some character.
I have to admit, before seeing your scene, I actually had no idea how Chicago pizza was made. So it was great for me to learn that.
Yay!
Was there a particular reason that you decided to cover Chicago style pizza?
Well, I'm from Chicago, so it was one of my favorite, and still is one of my favorite dishes growing up. It just reminded me of like home and the city. And when I was at school, I did my undergrad in New York. They don't have deep dish pizza, but near campus they had a Uno's pizza, which is really popular here. So I was like, yes, a little bit of home. So when I got the assignment and they said, oh, you can do a recipe on, some food that's really special to you. I was like, yes, I can show my love for this pizza. And I think it's so cool how it's made. So I thought it'd be interesting to show other people how it's made, because other people, might not know that it's made essentially like a cake.
So could you describe your process for creating the cutout assets that you used in making the scene?
So first I drew the sketches out on paper. I usually like drawing everything out on paper and then like scanning it in. And then I used the shape tools, so specifically the polyline tool and the line tools, to recreate assets I had drawn out on paper. And then I made a color palette for each color that I was going to use, for organization. And then I varied the line weight. So I used both thin and thick lines to create some more dimension, which was something that I'm pretty new to, because usually I use like one standard line weight and then just have it throughout the whole scene. But I really wanted to focus on like adding some more dimension with the each asset. So I varied the line weight. But yeah, I'm mostly using the polyline and line tools.
Were there other Harmony features that you relied on in particular to create this scene?
Definitely the node view. That's my favorite. That's probably my favorite part of the entire process, is doing the organization in the node view. So putting the effects and making sure all the pegs and looking at it from the rigging side of everything, making sure everything's organized so that I can really keep in line with my workflow and how everything's organized on my end. So that was a really big help. And then also using like the animation, like pivots for where I would place each asset and animate it as I went along. So those were some of the other major tools that I used. So
Awesome. And you mentioned animation pegs. Could you describe a bit more how you used them in creating the scene and what purpose they served?
Well, yeah. So, after I had all the scene assets completed and transferred them over to another scene to make the final composite, I inserted the pegs for each asset and set the pivot like in the center of them, so that when I moved them around, they wouldn't be jumping all over the place. And then that way I could animate also on peg layers instead of like the drawing layer, so that I could keep some more organization in the timeline as well as the node view. So
And so you added quite a few compositing. Hold on, let me back up. So for the fire and the pan and the final pizza assets, what was your process for adding compositing and effects?
So once everything was placed and animated to how I envisioned, I added the effects where the fire asset, I added a glowed node and then I changed the color to like a yellowish hue so that I could simulate light being cast off a real fire. And then for the final compositing of the scene, I created a basic square shape with the shape tool, and then I removed the fill, and then I added a glowed node to it and inverted it so that it created that kind of like border. And then I did the same process for the end of the animation, but I just changed it to a circle shape. That way I felt like I could have a nice little frame around the entire animation to make it more closed in so that you center on the look at what's happening dead center in the screen.
And I really love how you used shadows in the scene to also add and create dimension. How did you go about creating those shadows?
Yeah, so the shadows, I used shadow nodes and in the node view, and like for example, the pan asset had a shadow node attached to simulate directional and dimensional shadow. And then the final pizza at the end of the animation has a shadow, but I drew it by hand with the polyline tool around the board, the edge of the border. And then both the bottom of the main pizza and the slice. And then I added a shadow node to those elements to give off the cast shadow effect. So the effects nodes are so fun, honestly. They're really great at adding that
Yeah. And I have to ask, because now you've animated the creation of a Chicago style pizza, have you actually made a Chicago style pizza yourself?
Yeah, my mom, she makes some really great pizza. So like when I was doing some research on it, I was looking up like the traditional way to do it as well as splicing it with how my mom makes it. Yeah, immediately after I made this, I was like, man, can we order some pizza? Because I'm like really hungry for making this. But yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So you've just graduated from your undergrad program, and I know you're going to be starting your master's in the fall. But during your undergrad, you worked on some really exciting projects, and I was hoping you could tell us about the project that you're most proud of. Maybe introduce it and explain why you're so proud of it.
Yeah, so definitely would probably have to be my animation thesis. It was a 6 minute, 6.5, borderline 7 minute film called Blast to the Past, and it was about a college student who's having trouble writing an essay for her history class, trying to figure out how to write about influential African Americans throughout history. Um, and she feels like she's at a loss, but she falls asleep and she wakes up in a video game that helps her out. And throughout the video game, she's able to um, meet uh, influential figures or ideologies of influential figures to help her out while she battles adversaries that were common in major time periods in African American history. So it was a lot of fun, and it definitely was a huge technical challenge. I learned so much. One, because my final year at school, I spent it all here at home. So I pretty much was just animating nonstop in my own little house, little room. And so that was a challenge, but got a lot of work done, I will say. And then the second thing that was really pivotal about this project was that last fall, I took the advanced rigging training course with Toon Boom with Matt Watt. Thanks, Matt, so much. I learned so much in that class. It really, really improved my rigging abilities, and it additionally increased my passion for being a rigging artist. So this film, I think, is like definitely like the pinnacle of all that I learned, and is a testament to like why I love doing what I love to do.
That's awesome. So is your goal to become a rigging artist specifically?
Yeah, and I definitely want to look also at teaching because I would love to be a professor later down the line and teach others the wonders of the rigging process.
Yeah. And to wrap up, do you have any advice for artists who are just starting out with using Toon Boom Harmony?
Yeah. So whenever you start anything new, you're bound to run into a bunch of problems, and that's okay. Try not to get frustrated, take deep breaths, and don't be afraid to reach out for help because the forum is awesome. And Toon Boom also has a Discord with a bunch of people who all the time are like, "Hey, how do I, you know, change the line weight on the pencil tool?" Or pretty much ask questions and you get really quick responses from people all over the globe. You can even ask Toon Boom staff members. You can ask, people who are part of the ambassador program, like me. And yeah, so like, just don't be afraid to ask for help. And just keep on trucking through because if you really like doing it and it's what you want to do, it'll totally pay off in the end.
잘
잘
먹겠습니다.
먹겠습니다.
All right. Hi, Ryan. Could you start by introducing yourself?
Hey, Aaron. Thanks for having me. So my name is Ryan Imm. I'm an animator currently at Primal Screen here in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been working mainly in TV animation for a couple years now, and I'm very excited to be a Toon ambassador this year.
Awesome. We're excited to have you as an ambassador.
Awesome.
Could you describe for us the story that your scene tells?
Of course. So my scene for the Harmony 21 demo pack depicts my mom preparing sundubu kalguksu, which is Korean tofu stew with knife-cut noodles. And the sundubu kalguksu is enjoyed by the family as good food is made better with good company.
Oh, that's so nice. So it was inspired by your own family traditions.
Yeah, very much from real life.
Awesome. Was there anything else that inspired the scene that you wanted to touch on?
So the scene for sure was inspired by my mom's cooking. And I kind of wanted the scene to be a celebration of Korean food and culture. So the obvious choice was to tell the story through the lens of my family. And I was very fortunate to have delicious food growing up. Well, I guess I kind of still do. But I just wanted to portray the warmth and comfort that comes with enjoying good food with other people.
Yeah, nothing ever compares to your home cooked food.
Right?
And side note, I live in Koreatown in Toronto, and I'm obsessed with Korean food.
Really?
It's definitely one of the best foods in the world.
What's your favorite Korean dish, if you have
Oh my
one?
gosh, like fried chicken always.
Hell yeah. Nice, nice.
So could you explain what your process for frame by frame animation was and how you went about approaching it?
So I approached every stage from storyboards to animation the same way for the scene, at least from a drawing perspective. So I drew with the intent to copy, paste, and edit a lot to save time by not having to draw every frame from scratch. So I would draw a pose and then I would copy paste that pose into another frame. And then I would create a new pose by taking that drawing and selecting certain parts of it and editing it by either selecting vector points with the contour editor or by transforming with the select tool. And it's actually pretty similar to cutout animation in terms of getting a lot of mileage out of a few key drawings. And once all the animation was cleaned and colored, I added in line boil and a subtle texture overlay to soften the scene just a little bit.
Hmm. That's a really interesting method that you use, this like copy paste edit method. Had you used it before, or was it something that you've come up with yourself? Like, what was sort of the origin of this approach?
I used it a little bit on the job, and in TV animation, the deadlines can be a little tight. So we very much emphasize working smart and not working hard.
Mhm. And what harmony features did you most rely on to create this scene, and why?
So being frame by frame animation, I definitely relied the most on Harmony's drawing tools. working in vector allows for a lot of flexibility in terms of drawing efficiently, and being able to manipulate a line without the loss of quality that you get from like a raster program is extremely convenient, especially when you're working with textured lines like I did in this scene. It's so easy to just like add a control point to a line and then adjust the Bezier curves to get exactly what you need. And the drawing tools for Harmony are really good, so it's kind of obvious that I would lean on those the most.
Mm-hmm. And do you have a favorite tool in Harmony?
Ooh, that's a great question.
That's a surprise question, sorry.
Yeah, right? No, you're good. Honestly, probably just the select tool, because like you can select a drawing, move the pivot point, and then just like rotate it from there. It's like really robust, and I wish other programs had that feature.
Awesome. So I understand you use the perspective guide for the kitchen in this scene. How did the perspective guide support drawing the backgrounds and the objects?
So the perspective guide was so helpful for making the kitchen. I actually consider backgrounds to be somewhat of a weakness of mine, but with how lines like automatically line up to the perspective guide in Harmony, it was really easy to draw things in the proper perspective. Referring back to the perspective grid was also really helpful to make sure like objects in the scene were at the proper position or scale. And overall, I'm pretty happy with how the kitchen came out because it actually looks like my parents' kitchen.
That's amazing. Have you shown the scene to your parents yet?
I did, and they're like, "Oh my god, this is our home. What is this?" My mom was like, "Is that me?" I was like, "Of course it's you, Mom."
And that's nice because it's like a little clip that you can keep forever to remember their kitchen
Yeah,
vibe.
right?
And okay, I already asked you what your favorite feature of Harmony is in general, but did you have a favorite feature for this particular scene?
So in my work, obviously I rely the most on the drawing tools, but for this particular scene, I also really enjoyed using the color override node to easily create the line boil effect. Because traditionally when you're doing line boil, you'd have to redraw the same drawing like once or twice, and it can be very time consuming. But with the color override node, you can just add a peg and you get all of that for free pretty much. It does it automatically for you. And it saved me so much time. Like I said earlier, it's better to work smart and not work hard.
For sure. And I'm glad that you figured out the Toon Boom features that help you do that the best way. And then lastly, what advice do you have for artists who are maybe just starting out using Toon Boom?
So I definitely recommend getting comfortable with the node view. I know it can be a little intimidating sometimes, but it's so powerful once you begin to understand it. And all right, let me do this one again. So I highly recommend getting comfortable with the node view. It can be a little intimidating when you're starting out, but once you start to understand it, it can be such a powerful tool. So experiment with it, become best friends with it, just play around with it. There are a ton of tutorials online, and there's also a great Toon Boom Discord server that everybody should check out. I'm in it myself, and I've learned so much just from lurking around.